Hello. So in this video, I'm going to give you a lesson plan for teaching rebuttal. Though it doesn't necessarily need to be rebuttal, you could use this technique for a number of different things. I think it lends itself best to maybe activities like teaching if you're not doing it for rebuttal, like teaching paragraph structure, or any sort of activity where you are teaching them a specific writing technique, something you particularly want them to, that you particularly want your students to work through together. So I use this technique in terms of rebuttal, so I'm going to talk about it that way. So basically, I start out the class period and I have students refresh our memories about what rebuttal is. They will have read about it for homework, they will have maybe watched a video about it, etc., etc. We've talked about it in previous classes in my semester. So I have them remind us what rebuttal is. And then we talk about two broad approaches to rebuttal. One is where you are trying to persuade people on the other side. And with this, I largely focus on the challenge of overcoming confirmation bias and why it's beneficial when we're writing to try and convince people on the other side to think about their values and their goals and to frame our rebuttal in terms of those values and goals. Now, I make it clear this is not the same approach that Rogerian argument takes, for instance. This is not about I'm empathizing with you and I want to try and find a common ground. This is a rebuttal. And so this is basically saying you are wrong and I'll show you why. But if we can show the reader why their approach, whatever it is that they want or support, is not the most effective way to fulfill their values or to achieve their goals or whatever it is, then they're going to be more likely to be persuaded by our argument. So if I can show you, and this is the point that I emphasize for my students, if I can show you that a better way for you to get what you want or to do what you believe is right is by doing what I suggest rather than by doing what you intend to do, you're more likely to be convinced than if I frame things in terms of my own values and goals. So that's one thing. The other approach that we talk about is preaching to the choir, which is where you are writing to sort of reinforce the beliefs of people who already agree with you and critique the other side. And basically we talk about what options you have when doing this. Like, what can you do when you're preaching to the choir that you can't do when you're trying to persuade the other side? And like, students come up with ideas like, well, one of my students said you can rant, which is a somewhat uncharitable term, but essentially, yeah, like you have a lot more flexibility to not be kind or charitable or generous or engaged with the other side's perspective when you're writing for people who already believe you. But the other thing that we talk about with preaching to the choir is why you might do this. I mean, if the people that you're writing to already agree with you, what's the point of writing to them? And I mean, with this, we talk about things like reinforcing their beliefs, like strengthening the position that they already have, etc., etc. But I also like to add in that you can build community in this way by like showing other people that you are thinking the same things that they are thinking. You can legitimize some of their ideas, and this may or may not be a good thing. Like, if it's legitimizing like white supremacy or something like this, it's not a good thing. But if it's like letting other LGBT youth, for instance, know that you exist, that there are other LGBT youth out there struggling with identity issues, with sexuality issues, with family issues, whatever it is, like, that's actually a really great thing because it helps build those communities and gives people a sense of security. So We talk about those two things. The rebuttal that responds to the other side to try and persuade them, and the rebuttal that preaches to the choir. Then we turn to one of the essays that I had them read for homework. And I'm having them read essays about debates about pumpkin spice, because at time of filming, we're in Pumpkin Spice Week. Hence my orange sweater vest. But it doesn't matter. You can choose what you want, as long as the essay that they're reading is making some sort of argument, you can do this activity. Now, one of the things I didn't mention that requires a little bit of forethought or a little bit of foreplanning is that I will pull up a Google Doc, and before class starts, I will have emailed each of them the link to that Google Doc. And I set it up. I don't know how familiar you all are with Google Docs, but one of the things you can do when you share is you can share it by the link, and whoever has the link will be able to go into that document, but you have to give them editor permission in order to write in it. If it defaults to viewer permission, which means they can look at it but can't make changes. So for this activity, you want to give them editor permission. So I pull up that Google Doc and I say, all right, you're now collectively going to write a paragraph rebutting one of the points in the essay that you read for homework. So someone in class choose a particular point or a particular statement or claim, whatever it is, and we will, as a group, write a rebuttal to it. If your students don't normally bring laptops or tablets or whatever it is to class, you may want to let them know ahead of time that they should do this. My students pretty much always have their laptops with them, so it isn't that big a concern for me that I would need to warn them ahead of time. But I do tell them, if you don't have access to this, if you don't have your computer, or for whatever reason you don't want to log into Google Docs and whatnot, you can either tell me and I will type stuff in from the instructor podium, or whatever it is. Or you can come up to the instructor podium and type stuff in. I don't really care. No one does that. No one is going to do that. But one of the things that I do end up suggesting to them, and I've only done this activity once, so I don't know how standard a problem this is, but one of the issues that my students encountered was that they had like one person typing a paragraph and nobody else was really sure what to do. So what I suggested to them is that they could each go down onto different lines of the document and they could write out their ideas, and then they could look at everything that was produced, all the material that they collectively produced, and blend that into one full paragraph at the end. And that actually got them generating a lot of material, which was a really, really good sign. Then at some point, as we started nearing the end of the class period, I suggested, all right, now you should start thinking about taking this material and trying to shape it into a coherent paragraph. I suggested that they might want to talk to each other in order to do that, and they did not. It'll depend, I think, on how much your classes talk to one another, how much they sort of work together in groups versus how much they prefer just working independently. But they ended up pulling together a paragraph that a number of people contributed to. So, and I mean, I put at the top of the document, final paragraph, : so they had a dedicated space to write this final paragraph out. I had encouraged them to do a claim evidence interpretation structure for the paragraph, which we had learned about earlier in the semester. It wasn't fantastic, but it was getting there. And for a paragraph that they had written as a class in about 15 minutes, maybe, it was pretty solid. So what you then do, like, they now all have access to that paragraph. I asked them to grade the paragraph. what letter grade would you give it and why? And we had that discussion for a little bit. And then I gave them the grade that I would give, and I talked through what I thought were some of the strengths and weaknesses. But then the last sort of component of this is you tie this to the larger project. So in my case, they're doing a productive counter argument, and that's where this lesson fits in. And one of the options that they have for that project is a straight rebuttal of the other side's argument. And so I talk about what we can learn from the paragraph that they've written. How effectively does it respond to the other side? And what are the strengths and weaknesses? What would you want to be aware of going into the paragraphs for their own essays? The other thing, the other way that I had thought about doing this, and I went with the Google Docs approach, but the other option that I thought about doing was just pulling up a Word document on the screen and having students sort of talk through it and try and come up with something that I would then type out in real time. I haven't tried that version because the Google Docs version was pretty successful, and actually the students said that they thought it was a good activity. I'm probably not going to try it this way. I'm probably just going to stick with the Google Docs because I have at least one class that agrees that it works. But that's another option that you have.